Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about the 2024 Men's Big Ten Tournament in Minneapolis. This is the first year it's going to be played in Minneapolis, allowing for a centralized location for all the Dakota, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Manitoba college basketball fans. So maybe as best as MSU limps in the tournament as the 8th seed after finishing the middle of the pack of the middling Big Ten. Today, however, we're not going to talk about MSU specifically, but what we expect to happen in this year's tournament. The tournament rarely goes chalk, which means the top seeds win the games. And every team has matchup or interest driving their motivation. We'll have a more in-depth discussion with bracketologist Dom Lees tomorrow, where we will go over all the NCAA seeding implications. So today will be a little bit more superficial from a couple of amateurs, but we're going to go over the 5-day event and give you our thoughts. So I think the best thing to do is probably just get into, I suppose we can talk briefly about the fact that it's in Minneapolis. And this is definitely, as someone who goes to the Big Ten tournaments routinely now, I can say that Indianapolis is hands down the best place. Now, I've only been there in Chicago. I've been to United Center twice and Indianapolis 3 times, although once got totally canceled with COVID, which was the worst year ever getting turned around. Minneapolis would be interesting. It's a nice city, but it's not really easy to get to. I mean, you pretty much have to fly unless you're, Wisconsin, Iowa, or Minnesota. I mean, even Nebraska. And so in that sense, I think it's not the greatest location. It's probably better than like New York, which is probably even harder with hotel accommodations and such, or maybe even DC. But
get ready for Los Angeles or Las Vegas. I'm serious. That will happen.
Oh, I think Vegas would be fine. I'd be okay with Vegas.
It'll be
not LA.
It'll be on the West Coast at some point too. I think I haven't been to a major event in Minneapolis, so I can't judge it. I do know that Chicago is great for proximity reasons. I don't love the United Center in terms of vibe. I don't think it's great, but it's okay. It's not horrible. Yep. It's just not great. Indianapolis, I think, is just clear cut the best environment because of proximity of hotels, restaurants, and venues.
Yeah,
that's
and
what
all walkable.
Yeah, that it's you get down there to wherever you're staying, and that's kind of it. You don't necessarily need a car to get where you need to be. And also Indianapolis also benefits, as does Chicago, from centrality between most of the conference campuses. Minneapolis is that's the negative. I love Minneapolis as a city. I think I definitely like it better than Indianapolis, and it's just a different. Chicago's hard to measure because of its size, but Minneapolis is a great town. So I would imagine that you'll have fun. It's just, there's some negatives here. And to be quite honest at this point, if you're going to give one to Minneapolis, Detroit needs to be in that rotation as well. I mean, it really should be. And, you can do it at Little Caesars. So the venue is there. You have a lot of things that have changed in that area to the point where the things that people used to bitch about when the Final Four was last there, downtown hotels, lack of restaurants, all that stuff is moot now because it all exists. So within walking distance of Little Caesars. So I would think that Detroit is likely to get one at some point. I guess it just depends when. But Kind of a bad draw for Michigan State in that they're playing the home school,
Yeah.
which, we'll talk about when we talk about the Minnesota game in some detail, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I think it is interesting that they have not yet to announce any of the venues, so they're obviously working that all out. I mean, again, I think Indianapolis is the best because of the walkability and just the ease within to do the basketball games. And I would say too, as someone who's been to a number of them now, it is a lot of basketball. And by the time you get towards the end of Friday, you're pretty. I mean, it's if you're going to every game, which we do because we enjoy, we've watched all these teams through the year. It's a lot of basketball to be there watching. And it's not like a job. I mean, you're watching basketball, but it's much more than if you go to NCAA tournament because there you get a day in break in between. You have 4 games and 2 games. This is you're getting 4 games and 4 games.
And for me as an infrequent attender of these things over the years, I actually went to the very first one, which was at the United Center. Another Michigan State Minnesota matchup, although under very different circumstances. Michigan State was the regular season champion and got shocked by Minnesota in Michigan State's first ever Big Ten tournament game. But what used to be kind of cool about it from my perspective was, and maybe it still is for you, it's been a few years since I've been to one, but initially the idea of having fans from so many of the schools in the building at the same time was novel and was really something. It was fun. Like I remember having a great conversation with Purdue fans. And you got to remember, this is Izzo's 3rd year at Michigan State, his first Big Ten championship team. And those people could not have been nicer and more pro MSU to show you how times have changed in certain fan bases. Right. But that aspect of it I thought was really cool because we'd never experienced it before. It was novel. The Big Ten The Big Ten was one of the last holdouts in terms of starting up a conference tournament. But I think the novelty of that it's still fine, but it doesn't feel as different or as interesting to me as it once did. Just because, again, we've had whatever it is now, 26, 27 of these things, 28, wherever we're at.
Yeah.
So it's, that novelty factor is gone, and now it's just kind of an event. I will say this. I think that although it's not necessary this year because we have a clear-cut best team in the conference, we don't always have that. And I do think because of the unbalanced schedule, the tournament has maybe gotten to be a little bit more important than it once was, just in terms of sorting out, well, who truly is the best team in the league. Now that, as I say, that dynamic doesn't come up every year, but there have been years where it's come up. Michigan State, Ohio State in 2012 leaps to mind because that game was an absolute war between those teams. Michigan State, Michigan in 2019. I'll try to remember. Was it Michigan State? Who did Michigan State beat in 16 to win it? Wasn't Michigan, but there's
good question.
In any event, there have been years like this where it's been sort of a referendum on a regular season performance for one team versus another. I don't think that's the case this year. Nobody is going to look at however the Big Ten tournament unfolds and say, well, maybe Purdue wasn't actually the best team. Purdue's the best team in the league. That holds if somebody else manages to win the Big Ten tournament or not this year. But I say that only to say that I think it has grown in importance to some degree from where it was in the first several years, where it really was a novelty act. I mean, I never bought that. There used to be that line, and it's funny because Izzo's won more of these than any other coach, but there and program for that matter. But
right,
there used to be this line in the early years. Oh, Izzo doesn't care about the Big Ten tournament. He throws it. He doesn't want to win. which was never true. But it's also just as true that it wasn't really that important. Nobody really cared that much, and that's because it's just not part of the conference's DNA. I can remember as a kid, I remember one of my teammates, when I was playing, when I was in 8th grade, his parents took him on a trip to North Carolina because his father was getting transferred there, and they went to the ACC tournament. So this would have been, Jordan was still at Carolina, so it was the very early 80s. and he came back with a program and just talking about how great it was. And it did seem like this incredible thing, but that's because the ACC, it was always in those days, and keep in mind, we're talking about days of, single or at most 2 bids from a league to the tournament.
Yeah.
It mattered. It was a huge deal, and it was part of the conference's DNA in a way that it just never has been and never will be in the Big Ten, because the Big Ten's never going to go through a period where, listen, you got to win this thing if you want to go on to the big tournament. Never going to be that way.
Right.
So consequently, you can look at these things as, a half step up from exhibitions, but that's really all they are. Now, where there's a difference is there's 2 scenarios where it's different. One is what I already talked about, where you've got kind of a cloudy picture at the top, and it's sort of the deciding factor as to who the real best team is in the league. The other one, which Michigan State really looks like the only team in this boat in the Big Ten, I would say. Michigan State probably needs a win. So that's where it matters. So for Michigan State, this thing is very important. It's also kind of unfortunate that it exists in a way, because if it didn't exist and the season was just done now, Michigan State's almost beyond any doubt in the field. And in the field, not playing in Dayton. So they're in a scenario where it's win to avoid negative consequences. They're not in this, you got to win to get yourself in scenario. But that would be the only other circumstance where the tournament really matters for individual teams.
Yeah, it's the play-in to avoid the play-in right now.
Right.
And looking at 2016, they beat Purdue.
Okay.
66-62.
Right.
All tournament team, just since I've got the Wikipedia page: Denzel Valentine, Zach Irvin from Michigan, Vince Edwards from Purdue, AJ Hammonds from Purdue, and Siobhan Shields from Nebraska. So that's what I don't even remember him.
I do. He was a forward.
I'm sure he
score, but I wouldn't have guessed that. The other guys make sense. Those were all very, very effective players, but Michigan State's won this thing a lot. There's no doubt about that, but you've got to go back to 2019 for the last time. And they haven't really even been close. They haven't gone on a run in this thing, never mind winning it. I don't think they've gotten to a semifinal in the last three iterations of this. So it's been a while since we've seen a Big Ten tournament run in East Lansing.
Yeah. I was thinking that we did, but then I forgot that was Iowa. I shouldn't even bring that up. That's at least someone in our family was happy. I think probably the easiest thing is we'll just go through the brackets and just kind of go day by day and kind of just talk about the matchups briefly. This is brought to you by the Brothers Jesu Gutters. Just a reminder, if you need gutter work done, there's no better team to contact than the brothers. If your life's in the gutter and you're playing on Wednesday in the first round, I mean, life's rough. You're a Michigan fan. I get it. Or maybe your brother is. So, if help them out, help them with their gutters. Give the Brothers Jesu Gutters a call. If you're on the east side or the west side of the state, they'll be able to take care of whatever the problem is, whether it's just cleaning out, repairing, replacing. They can do it all, whether it's a big job or a small job. You can find out ways to contact them at the support page at www.tffinots.com/support. All right, so first round game. The first game of the day is going to be number 12 seed Maryland versus the 13 seed Rutgers. Rutgers, I think we're not quite so surprised they ended up in 13. Maryland was a bit of a shock that they ended up this far and fell almost to the bottom of the Big Ten. And they had a dreadful. They had I'd say they had a little spark for a little bit during the season, and then it just sort of faded. And they faded down the end as well. So, both these teams, obviously, teams are playing. They have to win the whole thing in order to make the NCAA tournament. And I don't know who I'd even pick for this game. So I think Rutgers beat Maryland pretty badly at Maryland last time they played, I think.
Maryland and Rutgers. Let me look. Yeah, Maryland won big at Rutgers by 17, 63-46. I mean, this is just, you want to talk about a game that has rock fight written all over it. This is it. They're both 7. Yeah. They're both 7-13 in the league on the season. Rutgers definitely seemed to get better as they went, because they looked really bad for a while early on, and then they got better.
Yeah,
became at least competitive. Maryland just never figured it out. But these two teams are number 4, Rutgers, and number 11, Maryland, in adjusted defense overall per Ken Pop.
Yeah.
Offensively, Maryland is number 151, but the number 352 in the country shooting from 3, and a whopping 233 from 2. So they can't shoot. But Rutgers is, let me pull this up. I had it up a second ago. Rutgers is number 296 in offense, 346 from 3, 353 from 2. And to top it off, they shoot a whopping 66% at the line. So that earlier game I referenced was 63-46 Maryland. I would say it's a pretty safe bet that first to 60 wins this thing. And it might be first to 50, because you just have this collision of a bad offensive team in Maryland and a truly horrible one in Rutgers, but 2 elite defensive teams. So, it's probably going to come down to maybe whomever can get a few broken plays, whichever team can get a couple of putbacks when a defensive box out gets blown. Somebody makes a really egregious turnover. It's just, I guess the other thing is, when I look at it, I think maybe the edge, I might give a slight one to Maryland, in that they do have a player in Jameer Young who is capable of going on a run in any game to an extent that I don't believe Rutgers can match. They don't really have that player. So, but this has the potential to be a truly ugly, ugly game.
I will say the amazing thing about going to the tournament, these tickets for the first round games usually can get for like $1, and you're paying more for the ticket fees, but it is fun because it's totally open seating. It's always open seating, so you can sit anywhere. Obviously, you can get really great seats. Like I remember watching, was it last year? I think it was maybe the year before, but Nebraska was playing that game, and Tominaga was really great. I mean, it was a lot of fun, that game, and I don't remember who they even played.
So when you go, are you going without tickets for the full 4 days? You just buying them day by day?
We buy the full session.
Oh,
we buy the full session through Michigan State. So we're around Michigan State fans, which makes it fine.
Yeah.
My wife can get by. No one really cares about there's only one Michigan State fan who really dislikes Iowa fans, so that's you I'm talking to. So generally speaking,
yeah,
it's not a real problem. So anyway, it works out pretty great, and we've got decent seats. But the first day is fun in that sense. Although you're watching usually bad teams.
That's another thing that I think people have smartened up with. First of all, the first year you didn't have the Wednesday session, if I remember correctly. Maybe you had,
probably not.
Yeah, because it was
they only had 11 teams, right?
Yeah, so I think there were. I can't remember how that went, but I don't believe there was a Wednesday session. I don't think there was maybe there was a Thursday. There must have been a Thursday session, and then we came in on Friday.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And the thing that was, I think it's gotten a lot more sophisticated, but what I vividly remember happening was that I think I've got this right. I have a memory of Indiana losing its first round game, and the amount of people trying to dump tickets far exceeded demand. Let's put it that way.
Sure. I'm sure that's the case.
I think there's probably a little more sophistication that goes into how people approach these things now. But that was something that, again, driven by inexperience, nobody really knew fully what it felt like to be part of one of these events. So it was a learning experience. But yeah, anyway, ugly game. That much I think you can count on.
Well, speaking of ugly, let's move on to the next game. Is number 11 Penn State versus 14th Michigan. And they only met once this season. Not surprisingly, Michigan lost to Penn State in Happy Valley by just 6. And it's interesting, when Michigan played them, Michigan was 6-8 going into Happy Valley. Yeah. And they finished the season going 2-15 after that, including that game. The team in, I don't even know how to describe it, except, the worst season they've had since the 60s, I suppose, whenever the last time they finished last in the Big Ten. Pretty remarkable, I think, worse than anyone. Although there were a couple people in our Big Ten Challenge who actually predicted Michigan to end up in last, but I think it may have just been more
emotion
out of spite than.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey, it paid off. Listen, it worked.
Yeah, it all counts. I can't remember where I picked them. It wasn't particularly high, but I certainly had them in a range where I thought the tournament was possible. And I did think there was a possibility that they would be improved. Well, that
you had them 9th, just so you know.
Okay. So I didn't have them high, but I didn't have them 14th. I didn't have one of 3
like a couple
games
away.
Yeah. It's been apocalyptically bad at Michigan. I mean, on every level you start the year out, well, even before the year, you have a guy that you think you brought in through the portal that you can't get admitted, so he never shows up. Then your coach has a health issue, which is, serious real life stuff, but that made it weird. Then that's understandable, but the way the return was handled was very strange. Didn't make any sense. Then you get the incident with the strength and conditioning coach, the long-standing strength and conditioning coach, the universally admired strength and conditioning coach, which leads to him being temporarily reassigned. And I believe now he has officially, he has parted ways with the university. And then you had the deal with your point guard. Is he academically eligible or not? Well, he kind of is, but we're going to sit him for road games. It just the whole and then mixed it on top of all of that. The cherry on top is you have the worst season at Michigan in at least 55, 60 years. I forget it's the first time.
It's sometime in the 60s, I think. Yeah.
First time they finished last since the 60s, but let's keep in mind, this is last in a 14-team league, not last in a 10-team
right.
league. So it's even worse. They had one really bad year that I remember, and I'd have to go back to see if they ended up with double-digit wins or not. Early in Bill Frieder's tenure, it might have even been the first year he was head coach there. They had a year where they just got caught without very much talent. And then he started building it back up via recruiting, and they got much better fairly quickly. But other than that, man, we have not seen this from Michigan. It's truly something else. And you look at this game, and you would normally, these Wednesday games are usually fairly competitive, or you expect they will be, because it's a bad team against a bad team, right? But this one, I mean, you look at it on paper, Penn State went 9-11 in the league.
Yeah.
They're not bad. Mike Rhodes, I give 15-16 overall, so not quite 500 and not quite 500 in the league. But man, I think
they really improved
quietly. Yeah, they didn't get much attention because, of course, they were never really in it for anything. as a postseason contender, kind of a rough non-conference. But Mike Rhodes really did some good work at Penn State in his first year with almost a total reinvention of the team. And one of the few guys he had coming back got off to a great start. And then there was this weird thing where, speaking of weird things, there was this weird deal where it seemed like he was hurt and he missed a couple of games. Then he came back, but he wasn't playing as much, and then he's gone. So from that point, it was an entirely new team, basically, that he was playing. But this is not a bad team. They're number 71 on offense, number 100 on defense. So the defense is not great, but compared to Michigan, I mean, they look like the bad boy Pistons. And offensively, 71. Hey, this is not a terrible team. They don't turn it over a ton. They're not great from three, but they're decent from two. They shoot it very well at the line, and they get there an okay amount. And on defense, they've got some issues, but they will force turnovers, and they're actually really good defending against the three. So it's hard. Besides the quality of the two teams and the records, it just in terms of momentum alone, there's no way you could pick Michigan in this game.
I don't think so. I don't know how you would. If there's
ever been a team that just looked desperate for the end to come, it's them. And
they're probably cheering for Penn State more than
so that's where I think we're heading in that one, to put it, kindly.
Yeah,
I think that's where we're going.
So for those of you who are upset with Peacock as a streaming service taking care of the Big Ten, rest assured, only the first round games are going to be in Peacock, and then from then on it's BTN. So that's how you know. Yeah, but there's going to be. I don't think there'll be a whole lot of new subscriptions to Peacock with the first round games, frankly. But let's move on to the second round. Then the first game, of course, is Michigan State, Minnesota. We'll just briefly mention. It's going to be in Minneapolis. Obviously, Minnesota's going to have a good home contingent, obviously, here. And I think, Minnesota is not, they are out of the big, they probably need to make the finals. We'll have to talk to Dom about that. Michigan State, as we mentioned, they don't probably need a win in order to make the NCAA tournament, but in order to sweat, to not sweat on Sunday and, probably get a win here and just feel better about yourself.
That's really it. I mean, I don't think a loss eliminates Michigan State, but man, you don't want to go into this because the other thing, too, that happens, of course, is we don't know yet. We'll actually start to have a little better picture by the time this game rolls around, because a lot of the mid-major conferences will conclude before then. But, you just never know how many, and Dom has already told us this, there aren't many likely bid stealers out there. But, man, all you need is one. And and then that's, you're dicey if you lose. And that also we can't foreclose the possibility that you could have a bid stealer from a high major conference, from a multi-bid league. So
we've seen that from the Big East before.
Absolutely.
Someone makes all the way.
It's happened. So you don't want to see that scenario. I happen to think, and I don't know, we'll see how it unfolds, but I think Michigan State getting the noon game is good. I would suspect
people be working.
Yeah, I honestly do. I wonder if that will have, because look, it's at home, and Minnesota's had an encouraging season, but I don't think there's mania on that campus for this team. So
no, I don't think so.
So a nighttime game, if they were in, say, the slot that Indiana's going to be playing in.
Right. Yeah.
That might be a different, scenario.
For sure.
Now, these are all things very much at the margins. I only mention that because it occurred to me looking at the schedule. But anyway, we'll talk about that stuff more when we do the preview.
Yeah. So the second game in the afternoon then is Wisconsin. They'll be taking on, I think we're probably guessing Maryland, but, could be either team.
It could be either team.
I think this is a team that is very vulnerable, and I would not be surprised if Maryland loses or Wisconsin loses to whomever they end up playing. And don't even make it to the quarterfinals.
Look, it's certainly easy to say based on this. 5. Over their last 11 games, Wisconsin is 3-8.
Yeah, you think Michigan State's in a swoon?
Yeah. So that's easy to say, right? And to feel it.
Right.
They still look to me like the heavy favorite over either of those teams.
Oh, I'm sure they will
18th
by the metrics. Yeah.
18th rated offense, 62 on defense. So the defense not great, but solid, respectable.
Mm-hmm.
The offense is very good. For the Badgers, I guess I look at it, the shooting's gone a little awry. They're sub 34% from three as a team. So that's now become a problem. The 2-point shooting is okay at number 82, but not elite. Even their turnover percentage, they're at 46, which for them is low.
That's
not
terrible.
Yeah,
for them,
that's not what we typically see. And the offensive rebounding, you remember way back in December, when we talked about this Wisconsin good. Team is, well, they've settled in at number 116. Still better than they normally are, but not at the level they were looking early in the season. I think there's been a little bit of coming back to earth for this team because when they were riding high and actually during a period they were first in the league, had it to themselves, I was never quite convinced that they were actually that good. That said, these things are such a crapshoot. I can see the argument that, the 3-8 skid, hey, they could lose. I can also see that will it shock me if Wisconsin, now I'm convinced of saying this, I guess I should look at the bracket to make sure of this statement. Yeah, would it shock you to see them get to the semifinals before losing to Purdue?
Oh, beating Northwestern?
Yeah, no, sure. It wouldn't. They can win a couple games. I think they, clearly this has been a season that the momentum has left them feeling, I would think, in a very bad place. But they are also an example of a team that's got to look at this as, hey, it's a new season.
Yeah, reset.
And we got a chance. So I'm going to figure that they'll win this game at least. Northwestern may be dicier, but they're going to win this game.
So we'll move on to the evening matchups, and we'll start with number 7, the Iowa Hawkeyes versus the number 10 seed, Ohio State Buckeyes. Both teams, came into East Lansing and won back-to-back games against the Spartans. That was sort of the second big win for Iowa. They'd beaten Wisconsin before. And Iowa is a team, and even Ohio State to some extent, they're potential bid stealers. Now, I don't know how far they have to go in order to get out. I don't know if they have to win it all or if they can just make it and lose to Purdue in the finals or something. But I think, they have plenty to play for, and they're teams that are hot-ish. Maybe Ohio State a little bit more than Iowa.
Very definitely. I think you can put Iowa in that category too. Iowa closed kind of disappointingly.
They got smoked by Illinois.
Yeah, they closed disappointingly, but they played, when you look at it, so Ohio State went 6-2 over their last 8.
Mm-hmm.
And Iowa went 5-3. So, I'd say they're both hotter teams. Ohio State is the more balanced team. Iowa's 15th in offense as usual. And again, really low turnover percentage, good 2-point shooting, mediocre 3-point shooting, elite free throw shooting. They don't get there more than average, but 78.3% at the line is great.
Yeah, wow.
Defensively, they're number 147 though. So they got a little better toward the end of the season because there was a point they were hanging not too long ago. They were hanging in like the 170s. So they got a little bit better.
They played
there.
Michigan State.
Yeah, they got a little bit better there, but this is not a good defensive team. Whereas Ohio State's picture is more balanced. 39th on offense, 69th on defense. And that defense has gotten a lot better since Diebler took over. And he's a really interesting situation because I can't see a scenario where they're going to give him the job. But if you are a mid-major, particularly one in the upper Midwest that's looking for a head coach, you got to be looking at this guy because he's clearly done, sometimes this stuff is fool's gold and it doesn't end up really turning into long-term success. But judgments in this business get made on stuff like that.
Oh, it's a hunch. It's just a guesswork anyway. You never know.
You're looking at it that way. And I guess it's a tough one because it feels to me like Ohio State's momentum is a little more solid. They're a more balanced team, but Iowa's one of those. And the other thing that's interesting about them too, and you would have probably a better read on this than I would even, but my sense is that in recent years, Iowa's been a pretty good Big Ten tournament team.
Yes. Well, I mean, they won it a couple years ago. Last year, both they and Michigan State lost in their first game. So but I do agree. I think Iowa tends to play well in the Big Ten tournament, which is unlike what they do in the NCAA tournament.
Even historically, I mean, there was the one year that Steve Alford won it with, a decent team, not a great team. And then he started talking about them being Big Ten champs, and he said, this guy's not long for the league.
Well, so I guess, to your point, I mean, Iowa has three titles.
Right.
Illinois has 3, Wisconsin has 3, Michigan State has 6, and Michigan has 3, 1 vacated.
Ohio State
has 5.
Ohio State's the one that's
has
contender.
5 with 1 vacated. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not bad performance in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about it historically, but I'm also thinking in recent years they've had some decent performances. I'm going to pick Ohio State just because it feels like there's a little more momentum on their side, but that's like with a lot of these games. That's really you just look at the Big Ten. Just look at the number of teams between 9 and 12 wins. I mean, it's going to mean that most of these games really are toss-ups. I just think Ohio State's a little more balanced, and that gives them an edge.
I mean, do you feel like Nebraska is that much better than Penn State?
No,
which is
pretty
right. I mean, and that's 3-11. I mean, that's a pretty wide berth. Now, I think Illinois and Purdue clearly the class of the conference, but outside of that, it's like
and look,
who knows?
Even Illinois, I don't think Illinois is I hear people talk about, maybe a Final Four run. I think they're out of their minds. I don't see that. I think there's one clear-cut, very, very, very good team until the next tournament starts, and then everybody else. Would Illinois be the best bet to get through in the finals against Purdue? Sure, of course, but do they look like enough of a juggernaut that you can't imagine any one of a number of these teams pulling it off against them in a semifinal? Of course not. Or even a quarterfinal. They're not that, they're not that great.
We'll talk about this in a second, but I think, the quarterfinal teams, the double bye teams, I think are at a disadvantage in some ways because the other teams had a game to sort of warm up.
Well, that's always the theory. That's always the theory.
Yeah. I don't know. And that may just be because there's so much parity that's how it just sort of plays out. But, and then, so the final game of the evening is Indiana, which reminds me that Nudge Printing now offers Indiana gear. Now, I know we have mostly Spartan fans listening, but maybe you have an Indiana Hoosier fan in your family somewhere, or a friend or colleague. You want to get them some cool stuff, some hoodies or t-shirts, whatever it might be. Head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. Gabe and his wife, Brittany, not only sell fantastic Spartan gear and just tons of stuff. So I just recommend just kind of perusing their selection just to find something you like. But they also have Indiana Hoosier stuff now, as well as Texas State, which would only be interesting, I think, to Dom, for a bracketologist. So check it out, nudgeprinting.com. You can get 20% off if you type in Final Four, just as one word, into checkout for the coupon code. So we assume they'll be playing Penn State. I mean, this is a game, honestly, I think I would almost go with Penn State, I think, in this game to take out Indiana, just because I think I don't know. I'm just not impressed with Indiana. I know they beat Michigan State, but I think that Penn State's could be. I mean, like all these games, it could go either way. But I think I'll just go with Penn State here, just to be contrarian.
I think a big thing here is going to be what's Trey Galloway's status, and I'll admit, I have not checked into that, and they've got until Thursday, so they've got some time. I did see he announced he's coming back next year. He's using his COVID year. But I didn't see what his health is for this game. If he's out, that's a big problem. Yeah, Penn State, the one thing that would bother me about it is, and I didn't look at the regular season matchup, so let's take a
I'll
quick
check that real
look.
quick. Yeah. I would say that I'm looking at the official injury report. Galloway is nowhere listed, at least in the sort of the national side I look at. So there's no official word anyway. So, for what that's worth.
Yeah. Penn State swept them.
Yeah.
They beat them.
Because they had the one recently, I think, in Bloomington.
I do remember, now that I'm looking at it, I remember they wrecked them at Assembly Hall by 14.
Yeah, 14
in February. Yeah. And then they won by 9 at home. Running counter to that, the one thing I do think about is, Wahab gives them at least physically a decent matchup against Ware.
Ware, yeah.
At center. But I just remember how much work Malik Hall was able to get done against Penn State and the guys they were throwing at him. And Malik Grinnell is certainly a player of Malik Hall's status in terms of his ability to score and to rebound, but especially in this game to score. And I just wonder if that's a matchup that Indiana might be able to really exploit. On the other hand, you got 2 pretty easy Penn State wins. And I'm not, okay, Indiana's won 4 games in a row. I said this before the MSU game, and I didn't come out of it feeling any differently. They're not a great team. They
didn't look good.
No. So I think an upset's possible.
Yeah. All right, moving on then to the quarterfinals match. The first one will be Purdue, and I'm going to probably predict Michigan State pulls it off against Minnesota, but that'd be my hunch. I just don't see anyone beating Purdue in this game. I think they would beat either team.
I think in this tournament, I don't see anybody beating Purdue. I think that this is where Matt Painter's, because again, he's playing Big Ten teams. So we saw it. Michigan State played pretty damned well in West Lafayette, and they still lost by 6.
Mm-hmm.
What that convinces me of even more than I was before is outside of a handful of teams nationally, and there are some that on the right day could beat Purdue playing straight up. I think you have to play a particular style to really maximize your chances against Purdue, and there just aren't many, if any, teams in the Big Ten that do that. And so I think Purdue is in very good shape to win this whole thing because of that. Because I don't see anybody that's going to swarm Edey, that's going to apply a lot of sustained ball pressure to their guards. Those are the things that I really think you need to do. And then on the offensive end, you got to be able to take advantage of Edey playing drop coverage. And the Big Ten does have some teams and players that can do that, but it's the defensive end that I think causes the problem. There just aren't teams in this league that are built. But you look at other national contenders, Houston. I'd love to see Houston play Purdue. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because I don't think Purdue will get that far. But I would love to see a team like Houston. I think Houston would turn those guys loose defensively, get up into their chest, and I think it would be a very long day for Mr. Smith and Mr. Lawyer. That's my thinking. But we're not going to see that in this tournament. So
the afternoon game then will be Northwestern, the 4 seed, versus either Wisconsin or the 12 or 13. I feel like the Northwestern is depleted enough at this point. I just don't trust them coming down the end. I just feel like they're going to lose to whoever it is.
They've played.
They are winning still.
Well.
Yeah,
they've played pretty well since the injury to Nicholson, especially, which I thought might be enough to finally knock the wind out of their sails. But they gave Michigan State all they wanted on the road, and then they won their last game. Look, any team with Boo Buie has a chance. And and they've got other guys. Barnheiser has obviously become a really solid player. Martinelli, I think, has looked pretty good since he stepped into the starting lineup role, and he was having a good year as a 6th man anyway. And Langborg is back, and, he's a dangerous player. So they've got some guys. They lack depth. They might be short one shooter, but that kind of depends on how Barnheiser shoots it. If he's shooting it well, they might still have enough. But yeah, a Northwestern Wisconsin matchup would be really interesting. On paper, I'd probably favor Wisconsin, but then you have to take into account how they've played. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Like pretty much all these teams.
Yeah.
So they go into the evening matchups there on Friday. It's the number 2 seed Illinois Fighting Illini versus either Iowa or Ohio State. I like Iowa against either of these teams. Or, I'm sorry, Illinois against either of these teams. Yeah. I just don't think either of these teams have enough. I mean, I guess I see Ohio State having a chance only because I've seen Iowa play them and just really have no answer for defensively to stop Illinois. I mean, Illinois just is able to score too easily against them.
That's it.
And they just can't keep up with them.
That's it. I think that's the problem with an Iowa run is, although their offense rates very, very highly, it rates highly for very specific reasons. And if you're playing this Illinois team, if you're Iowa, your only chance, there have been years, like if you go back to the last team that Garza was on, Garza and Vice Camp and those guys, that team could shoot. Mm-hmm. That was a team that could go out and hit 16 threes on you in a game. And they had low post play too. That's not this Iowa team. They're efficient offensively, but they're not explosive the way that one was. And it feels to me like if a team like Iowa, with the way they defend, is going to hang in there against Illinois, they've almost got to have one of those days where they just outscore Illinois. And I don't see that. I just don't see that in the cards. Illinois is not a great defensive team too. It's worth mentioning. I think it's gone under the radar. They're number 73 in overall defense. But that's worlds better than Iowa. And they're number 4 on offense. And they do a lot of things well offensively. So I'm with you. I don't see Iowa with a really clear path to beating Illinois. Ohio State, on the other hand, I'd give a puncher's chance. You'd still favor Illinois, but it wouldn't be a shocker to me because I think Ohio State has some matchups physically for this team. We talk about Illinois. One of their real strengths is how big they are from 1 through 5. Yeah. Well, Ohio State can't quite match that because Thornton isn't quite at that level, but everybody else is. And Thornton creates his own problems trying to deal with him. So I would give Ohio State a puncher's chance, but I agree with you. Illinois would be the favorite.
Yeah, the only thing that was going to bail out Iowa, and I think he'll be the X factor for him, not only, for the Big Ten tournament, if they were to actually get anything going and then make it into the NCAA tournament, they need a really great Tony Perkins.
Yeah, and he had a terrible day.
He's just had a couple bad games, and when he's really good and on, they are a tough team to beat. When he's not, now I say that, yet they beat Michigan State where he didn't do a whole lot. Michigan State was able to neutralize him, but everybody else kind of went wild. So anyway, so that'd be sort of the one chance I think they have against Illinois if they because he's the one who gets moving in transition too.
Yeah.
All right. So the final game of the quarterfinals is Nebraska, number 3 seed, taking on Indiana, and the winner of the Indiana Penn State probable game. And Nebraska's a tough team. If this is in Lincoln, I'd say, it's Nebraska. But I don't know. I just don't trust them outside of their home court. I don't know. This is how I feel about so many of these teams. I really have no clue which team's going to show up. Again, I could totally see a Penn State getting past Nebraska, and it would not shock me.
Yeah,
but Indiana would be surprised.
You make a point. Nebraska won exactly 2 Big Ten road games this year. They won at Indiana during a stretch when everybody was, and they beat them by 15. During a stretch when everybody was beating Indiana. And they won at Michigan also by an identical 85-70 score in their last game. So that's interesting. I agree with you. They have not proven to be the kind of team that you automatically have faith in. But, man, that's a nice draw. I mean, it really is. That's a nice draw for them. Because if they were, it's an ironic thing, they should be facing a worse draw than Illinois, right? Because they're the 3 seed. Illinois is the 2 seed. But I don't feel that's the case. If Ohio State gets through, I think Ohio State is a better team right now. I certainly have more faith in them than I do any of the teams that could be facing Nebraska. So let's assume, just for the sake of argument, it's Indiana who is would be Indiana, Penn State, or Michigan, right? Those are the 3 teams.
Right.
That's, I like Nebraska's chances. I really do, to at least get to a semifinal. And then, at that point, you got to see who's waiting for you there. But I would probably be inclined to see them as a prohibitive favorite.
Yeah, I think so.
If you look at Nebraska, quietly, very balanced team, 43 on offense, 26 on defense. We haven't talked about them here because MSU saw them so early. But
ages ago, back in December.
This is a good team. This is by far the best. 26 defensively. Fred Hoiberg's teams haven't been within solar systems of that. And the offense at 43 is not bad either. They've shot the ball reasonably well. They have a little bit of a turnover problem. They don't really offensive rebound, but the shooting is real. And that's enabled them to hang in there and be pretty effective. And then defensively, man, I'll tell you what the most impressive number is for this team as I look at it. They are number 14 against twos. Now, what do we normally talk about going along with good 2-point defense? It's shot blocking, right?
Yeah.
They are only number 276 in block percentage. So there's virtually no rim protection. If you think about their team, their center is Mast, who is not exactly an athletic marvel.
Nope.
Jawan Gay gives them a little something, but they really don't have anything in terms of rim protection, and yet they're number 14 against twos. That's really, really impressive. So, I'm going to say I like Nebraska's, of the 4 double-bye teams, I think Nebraska is probably the one I give the second best chance to get to the semifinals. Yeah. Just because of matchups. I think Illinois might have a tougher quarterfinal game, and I think Northwestern likely will as well.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that brings us to the Illinois-Nebraska game, basically, in the semifinals. We're going to pretty much go in chalk here. So, and I just like Illinois in this game. I like Illinois' team. I know you don't like them as much, but I think
on paper, sure. But again,
they have not performed well recently.
And I'll say the same thing I said about Ohio State. If they were to get the matchup against Illinois, they're a balanced team. And Illinois is they're not a disaster area. They're not Michigan or Iowa, but they don't guard very well.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous thing to have. It's a really dangerous thing in tournament basketball to not be able to guard well. I know people say, well, at the highest levels, great offense wins. Sometimes it does. But if you can't stop people, it's tough. It's tough to win multiple games over a short period of time. And, Nebraska's offense is not a juggernaut, but it's not bad. And I think they would have a chance. I'd favor Illinois, but I'd give Nebraska a real chance. I didn't look at what the matchups were. Let's take a quick look. In the regular season, they lost in overtime in Champaign in the only meeting. I remember that game. They lost by 3 in OT in Champaign. So they were pretty competitive in that game. So neutral court, I don't know. I'd give them a chance.
Yeah. Well, I guess before we go to the other semifinal game, which is Purdue and Northwestern, probably we'll just say, just a quick reminder that if you need your glasses cleaned, if you're not seeing the world as well as you should outside, And now we actually have sunlight. You want to make sure it gets in your house. So contact the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids if you're in the Grand Rapids area. They'll come out and take care of you. They'll do fantastic, meticulous work. Not only your house, but maybe your business, high-rise, whatever it might be. They're so good they even did the state capitol. So all those legislators can see all the people protesting out in the front lawn. You can get a hold of them at thefinalfoursnottheschedule.com/support. There you can find a link, 15% off if you mention Rebound to get your estimate. Let's see. So Purdue, I'm trying to think. Did they just play with Northwestern? I mean, I know they lost to Northwestern in Evanston, just like last year.
They also
so you can say,
won a game. They won the game in West Lafayette that Chris Collins got tossed at the end of it.
Oh, that's right.
Very competitive game, and that was not that long ago.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess any team's going to trip them up. That would be the team, I suppose.
They're the one, but I'll tell you what makes me think it's not likely to see a repeat, if it is Northwestern in that game, is being down Ty Berry now.
Yeah.
They don't play exactly the way they did last year. They're not quite as good defensively as they were, but they're the one team in the Big Ten at full strength that I think they can do some of the things, at least stylistically, that as a matter of course they do them. They can give Purdue trouble. But with Berry, they're down a guard. You've replaced him with Martinelli. I like Martinelli a lot. I just don't think he's the kind of guy who really helps them do the things they need to do to hang in there against Purdue. So I would be inclined to see Purdue with more of a clear-cut win in this game because of that. If Ty Berry was healthy, I'd give Northwestern a real shot. But
yeah,
without him, I just don't see it. And you're also, the other thing is, you got to remember, not that anybody stops Edey, but Nicholson at least gave them a guy who physically can kind of hang in there. With him, they're smaller. Hunger is a little bit smaller, and then they go with Preston,
and he's thin,
way smaller. So they're also down a little bit at the 5 spot.
All right, well, that puts us at the championship game, and I think, it's not very, it's a little anticlimactic, but I think, Purdue pulls us out, and whoever they end up facing
they're going to win. They're going to win this thing. I'd just be very surprised.
It's hard to imagine.
I'd be very surprised. Scenario. Matt Painter tends to take it seriously. His team, as I mentioned, is built for the Big Ten. And it's not an accident that they fared very well against. I mean, if you look back over, was it definitely the past 4 seasons, and especially the last 3, Purdue was just clear-cut the best team in the Big Ten. And it's in part, they've obviously got good players, and they're well coached, but it's that specifically, I think they're built to fare well in this conference against the kinds of teams that they play. They're not facing teams that play them in ways that I think you have to have a good shot at disrupting them.
Yeah.
So I just think with that, and the fact that, there isn't that, some years in the Big Ten, clearly, if we were talking about the Big Ten, say during the COVID year, during 2021, well, there were enough teams that you could imagine Michigan that year, Illinois that year, and maybe even Iowa that year, that could just stand up and play Purdue straight up and still have enough to maybe have a shot. The Big Ten doesn't have, I don't think Illinois is as good as any of those teams I just mentioned. And not vis-a-vis Purdue for sure. So it's just hard to imagine it happening.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, but I almost think like Purdue, the only chance I feel like someone's to take them out of the quarterfinals before they get rolling, because I feel like as soon as they get rolling, they're just going to steamroll all the way through it. And you almost have to catch these teams the first game.
I would agree with you.
I think it's unlikely.
Right. It's probably the best shot, and that seems very unlikely. Well, although,
Penn State almost got him last year. Well, that was a heck of a game.
It could be Michigan State in that game, and wouldn't that be the ultimate cherry on top of this season?
That'd be classic Michigan State to pull that off.
Just come out and and you would say there's not a 0% chance. It's a very low chance, but yeah, we'll see.
And then they play Wisconsin, lose a third time to Wisconsin. So who knows? All right. So I think we'll leave it there. Just again, a reminder. So if you're at the Big Ten tournament, I'm going to be in section 106.
Oh boy.
I don't know what you're worried about. People are awesome. They're very nice and friendly and stuff. So yeah, well, most of them, anyway, you're welcome to come say hi. Be happy to say hi to you if you follow the show. So anyway, I'll see everybody there. And until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.